Well, hello there, passionate private practice owner. My name is Gerda, and you are listening to the Private Practice Success Podcast. And this is episode number 29. The topic for today's discussion is 30 clients a week in school hours. I am going to guess that this might prove to be a bit of a triggering title for some people, but I want you to bear with me here. And if you've read this title and you went, well, that's just crazy, Gerda, and you immediately pressed play, well, then I'm glad that you have joined me. And therefore, the title has done its job, because today's episode is incredibly important for your business, but also for your team and also for the industry of allied health. Obviously, I am speaking mostly to group practice owners here. Now, if you are a clinician wanting to go into private practice yourself, this is going to stand you in such good stead listening to this podcast as well. But for my group practice owners, for you as a private practice business owner, it is your job to set clear KPIs, key performance indicators, for your clinical team. Yes, for your admin team as well, but today we're talking clinical team. And the KPI I'm going to talk about specifically here is billable hours. So it's your job to set clear KPIs, i.e. billable hours for your team, in order to ensure that you can keep the doors open of your business. Simultaneously, you want to make sure that you do that in a way, and as I say this, I want you to see it in your mind in bold, underlined, and highlighted in bright pink, without burning your team out. All right, let me say that again. Without burning your team out. Because if your team burns out, the business loses. The clinician loses. The clients lose. The industry lose. It doesn't serve anybody. And what I often see is that because my group practice owners are aware of burnout and we are wanting to protect our team as much as possible, we step away from having clear KPIs. And instead of going, how do we manage this in a balanced way where we can still service a sufficient amount of people to actually make a real difference and impact, because we know the need and demand is so big, but also doing it in a way where we can keep our doors open? Because take it from me, every week there is a group practice closing its doors. That is not a lie. This is not fear-mongering. And the scary part is that a lot of these businesses are really large group practices. You know, those ones that you hear about and you see at networking events and you look at their social media and you're going, oh, I'm just a small little group practice owner. I've just got like 5 or 6 people. And you're looking at these other people and businesses, and they've got multiple locations. They've got in excess of 20, 30, even 40, 50, even larger clinicians. And those people are also closing down. You know how I know this stuff? Because for me personally, in Brisbane, I've hired people that has come from businesses that's closed down. With the practice owners I work with across Australia, they are hiring people. They are doing interviews with people that are looking for jobs because the places where they work are closing down. There is a lot of information out there if you know where to look to find this information. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we keep our doors open, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't burn our team out. And that is the purpose of today's discussion, because it doesn't have to be this or that. It can be and. We can have both things, but you need to know how to do it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's talk about this freaking 30 clients a week in school hours. Well, that is actually how I started in solo private practice. So I had my second son back in 2006 in December. And the very next year, in round about February, I registered my ABN. And it was round about April that I started doing solo private practice. Now, obviously, I had a very young baby. He went into daycare. His older sister had started prep that year. So I had two young kids. But I also love to work. I love being a psychologist. And I went, you know what, Gerda, this is the perfect time to start your private practice, which I then did. And being a new mom, now having two young kids, I wanted that time freedom and that flexibility. So what I did is I would drop Henno off at daycare in the morning. I would drop Cassidy off at school. She generally went to before school care. So I could do that by 8 o'clock. By 8:10, I would walk into the practice, which was just a one-room practice, by the way. I would walk into the practice, and then as of 9 o'clock, I would have 6 clients back to back. So I saw a client at 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, and 2. That was my 6 clients. I finished just before 3 p.m. I would pack up everything, get in the car, and go and collect Cassidy. Her school was out just after 3 o'clock, like quarter past. And then I would go and get Henno, would drive home, and would be a mum for the rest of the day. And that is how I ran my solo private practice for the rest of the year. And I must say it very, very quickly, obviously when I started, I didn't have 6 clients a day straight off the bat, but it grew so incredibly fast. And before I knew it, that was my week. I would book 6 clients a day from 9 to 3. I would be done 5 days a week. Now, obviously, everybody didn't attend every day, right? But let's say you would have 5 cancellations over the course of the week. That was still like 25 clients a week. And I did all of that in school hours because I was really motivated to have that harmony between staying in my profession and doing the work that I love, but also being able to be there for the kid. Now, obviously, I did have to do some outside of client hours work. This I would normally do on a Friday night because I'm very structured in my thinking like that. And it's like, I want to go into the weekend. I didn't want to do a lot of stuff on Saturday and Sunday. So I would then go, okay, after everybody's settled in for Friday, after school, then it would just go, all right, I'm going to spend some time doing any paperwork that I didn't get to during the week. Because obviously, if somebody cancels, that's when you do your paperwork, your GP letters, your GP reports, all of that type of stuff. And the way that I run that solo practice was really very efficient. I'm so proud of myself when I say that because I didn't have a reception. I had no reception in 2006. It was only when I moved to a larger location the next year that I actually hired my first receptionist. At that time, there were no VAs. So when I arrived at the practice just after 8 o'clock, and then between 8 and 9, that is when I would check any voicemails. I didn't have an official landline. I just used my mobile phone. So the exact mobile number that I still have today is what I used then. I have only had one mobile phone number since I arrived in Australia. I used that number for clients, for personal. I still have the exact same mobile number. And you know what? It has never been abused by clients. My clients have been so amazing. But anyway, so I would just have my personal mobile phone. Those days, there were no diary management costs. There was no such thing as SMS costs. My clients were all booked into a paper diary. I booked them all like that. It was so low cost if you think about it, right? My only real expenses was for the room that I had. And it was a 19 square meter room. So the room was relatively large. I had like a big 3-seater sofa. I had my chair. I had a beautiful bookcase. I just loved that space. I had a separate area in the same room with my desk and a smaller like swivel chair where I could sit and do any paperwork related stuff. I just loved it. But if you think about it, my clients didn't have a waiting room. That's the other bit. But I was seeing clients every hour on the hour. So I had to really manage them. And I had to be really clear and say, hey, this is where I'm at. When you arrive, if the blinds are closed, just wait outside because I'm still in session. If the blinds are open, you're welcome just to come straight in. And clients followed those instructions and they would just wait outside. I had a little room on the side of a very small shopping center. So it was not where all the main shops was. You had to walk like almost around to the side and then you would find my door there. And it was just perfect. And if you think about maybe any thoughts that you might have around this, could you imagine ever running a practice without a waiting room, without somewhere for your clients to sit? It sounds like, what? That's exactly how I did it. So I basically started my private practice on a freaking shoestring budget. And I actually earned really good income from it because my clients attended really, really well. So it was amazing. So you would think, but why would you then start a group practice, Gerda? And that's just because I've always been driven by wanting to help more people in better and more effective ways. And I was getting a lot of child referrals, and I don't see kids. I prefer to see young adults and older. And I just went, well, somebody needs to look after these referrals, and it ain't going to be me because that's not my niche. So I'm going to hire my first child psychologist. And I went, well, good, if you want to do that, you're going to have another room. And that is when I rented a 3-room practice just in a building opposite the shopping center. And that's when I hired my first reception. And that's just where everything then grew from there, which was a whirlwind of growth and excitement, but also a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of freaking mistakes, a lot of failures along the way, and all of that type of stuff. But 30 clients a week in school hours. And for me, private practice has always been the place that I was going to work. So I say obviously, but you might not know this. I am from South Africa. I studied my psychology undergrad and postgrad. So I did my master's back in South Africa. And in South Africa back then, I don't know whether times might have changed. I've not kept up with the industry in South Africa. But back then, you became a psychologist with the notion of going into private practice. There was not really any other jobs for you to do. There was maybe one psychologist job in public or private hospitals, but generally what would happen is that person would get a job there and they would work there for their entire life. I know that because we were trained by people in psychiatric hospitals back in South Africa, and those were some of the best lecturers I had in psychopathology. But that was their career, staying in that hospital, and there were no other opportunities to go in there. So back in South Africa, that's what you did. You would go into private practice, and it would be solo private practice. So for me, it was always like, obviously, that's what I'm going to do. And that's why I started my solo private practice. And private practice will always be and has always been my first love, but also my only love. There is nothing that can entice me away from private practice. I don't care. They can throw anything at me. I will not work for an NGO. I will never work in public mental health. I just could not deal with the freaking red tape, the bureaucracy. It would frustrate me to no ends. I just love the freedom of being able to be creative and do what you want, of course, within the law and all of that type of stuff within private practice. The thing, however, is that if you want to be successful in private practice, you need to earn every dollar, right? We do not get any funding. You rarely get any grants. You would be very lucky to get a grant in private practice. You will probably only get a grant if you are in some type of consortium with another NGO or stuff like that. That's just not, how those things work. Every dollar needs to be earned. And we want to earn that money, as I said earlier, without burning out your team. But there's a place where we go wrong here. And if I reflect on what made it possible for me to easily book without getting totally freaked out about it, 30 clients a week in school hours. What allowed me to start at 9, finish that client at 9:50, do my notes, go to the toilet, meet the next one at 10 o'clock. See that client finish at 10:50. Also take their payment, by the way, because I would take their own payment. I did have an FPOS machine. Yes, I did. So there was merchant fees. That was another expense I had. Take their payment, book the next appointment, do my notes, go to the toilet, get the next person in. When I sit back and unpack that, I honestly believe it is 3 things. It is understanding my theoretical foundations, thing number 1. Thing number 2 is being really skilled in caseload management. And thing number 3, I really should get a better word for thing, but thing number 3 is really great time mastery in clinical practice. Quick but very exciting side note. Doors to Ignite Your Practice 2025 is now open. This is a self-study version of one of my best performing and most popular programs. With Ignite, we solve 3 of the biggest problems that stop practice owners from growing their business. And that is lack of money, lack of time, and lack of clinical team. So if you are struggling with any of those 3 issues right now, you need to check out Ignite Your Practice. Within Ignite, I share with you my best strategies to improve your cash flow, fill your diary, retain your clients, reclaim your time, empower your team, and finally, to recruit new talent. These are rock-solid strategies that work across all allied health disciplines, and I'm offering this to you at a fraction of what it would normally cost to work with me. Interested? Just flick me an email at gerda@private-practice-success.com and I will send you a complete outline of what is included. Please note that doors close Monday, 5 May 2025 at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I can't wait to welcome you to Ignite Your Practice. So needless to say, my message at the end is going to be that is the 3 things that you need to help your clinicians with. And it's your job as the practice owner to make sure they know how to do those 3 things. Yes, we would love for the universities to take care of that. But I can tell you I've had a sufficient amount of provisional psychologists and new grads through my practice doors to know that this does not happen at the level required for sustainable private practice. Just doesn't happen. And I think that's a big failure. And again, I didn't go to university in Australia. I am only commenting on what I see and what I see people need when they come out of a master's even, and where they are at and what they need through their supervision when they join our practice. So let's talk about theoretical frameworks. And yes, we're going to go a bit clinical here. But you know what? All of that clinical stuff is linked to business in private practice. It just is what it is. So I find that when people don't have confidence in their theoretical framework, that is when they feel very unprepared going into their sessions. And if I think back to when I was doing my master's, so, you do your undergrad, then I did my honors, and then I did my master's. And the first year of master's back in South Africa was just classes. We had classes Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. And then you still had to do your clinical client hours. So you had a minimum amount of clinical hours, even in year 1 of master's that you had to do. And you had to fit that around your day classes. So we would go in normally on Saturdays, see clients at the university clinic. We would also do those after hours. So it was freaking full on. So that was year 1. And then year 2, we had our formal placements. And it was 6-month placement. So you would have the first semester placement at one place. And then the second semester, you would have a placement at another. You would still have group supervision and you would still have like intern classes that you still had to attend during that time. And one of the subjects we had in the intern here was called integrative psychology. And we literally had 1 or 2 classes on it. And then we just had this big, humongous assignment that we had to do. And the assignment basically was, the brief was, okay, during your first year of master's, we trained you in all these different types of therapies, such as cognitive behavior therapy, transactional analysis, object relations. As you can see, I did a lot of psychodynamic training. So we had this whole list of therapies that we were trained in. Person-centered therapy, that was another one that we were trained in, all of the things. So you learned that in year 1 of master's. And now in year 2, they said, we want you to now reflect on all the stuff that you've learned. And you now need to come and do a presentation to the entire class and all your lecturers in terms of presenting to them your choice of theoretical framework, why that is your choice, and how you can apply that in your client work. And that was such a broad and frustrating assignment to get. It's like, what? Now you want me to go through all of the stuff again that I did last year? And I loved all of it. I could see how all of it's going to be useful for different client presentations. Now you're making me choose something. I found it incredibly frustrating. I think I have trauma from having to complete that assignment. But you know what? It's normally the stuff that's hardest to do that is the best for you, because it was an incredibly challenging assignment, but it has stood me in such good stead over the years. And I remember when I went in, I had like this box and I was talking about, everything I do, how it's all encapsulated within person-centered therapy, because without that rapport, without the client engagement, without that reflective listening and micro skills that you need, you're not going to get anywhere. Doesn't matter what type of therapy you want to do with the client, you're not going to get anywhere where you don't have that trust. And then I started to talk about the various theories and the stuff that I love and all of that stuff. But it meant, and it empowered me with the knowing that I could go from there into any session with a client fully unprepared, and I would know what I'm doing, all right? And that means that when I started doing a lot of clinical work, I didn't have to go, oh, what do I need to do for this client? What do I need to do for the next client? It's like I knew what I had to do because it was all encapsulated into my theoretical approach. Doesn't mean that I couldn't open up my toolbox of skills and take a bit of ACT, take a bit of CBT, take a bit of object relations, take a bit of egograms out of here, and use what the client needed. I could do all that stuff. I had my toolbox of skills. But because I knew within what framework that was being done, it was easy. I didn't have that anxious worry that I see a lot of new grads have, where they feel like they need to look at every client with a new theoretical framework in order to do the best job possible. And I love that for our clinicians, that they always want to do their best job, but it's really hard work. If you imagine, not 30 clients, even just 20 clients a week, and having to go, okay, what's my approach of this client? It's like, that is draining. So it is really about going like, as the human delivering the therapy, I need to know what is my beliefs around human behavior. What is my beliefs around how change happens, and how do I approach that with each and every client? And I can tell you, I love person-centered therapy. I believe, and maybe this is just the standards that I hold for myself as a psychologist, I expect myself to be able to build rapport with any client. And when I was doing a lot of clinical work, I would have clients working in corporate space, to somebody that would walk into the practice with his overalls on. I clearly remember this one client I had, his hands like dirty. It's like he's just stepped out from underneath a motor vehicle. He worked on cars, and I would shake his hand, would say, hey, so great to see you. And we'd go in and do our session. I would be the same person I would still dress in exactly the same clothes. I would have the exact same manner, but I could engage, build rapport and trust with any person. And I believe that as a psychologist, that is your job, being able to do that. And I know there's that belief out there that sometimes you're just not a good fit for a client. And the clients have choice. And sometimes, they just decide you're not a good fit for them, or you decide you're not a good fit for them. I've got different standards for myself, and that's okay. You can have different standards for yourself. But my standard has always been, and I took it as a challenge, that I need to be able to engage each and every client that comes through the door in session 1. That's my goal in session 1. It's not to get all the answers to my intake form, right? It's not to do a full diagnostic and assessment in case formulation in session 1. No. The number one primary goal in session 1 is building trust, rapport, and client engagement. If I do nothing else in that session, I'm fine, because that's what session 2 can be for. So that was so important for me. And this is my views, right, on who I am as a psychologist. And I can tell you, really embedding the clinical work that I do and knowing what that is for me just made seeing clients so freaking easy. So easy. A lot of people ask me, Gerda, how did you never burn out? Because I did a lot of trauma work. But it's because of that, because that has always been the underpinnings of the work that I do. And when you have really great trust and engagement with clients, therapy is easy. It becomes easy, and it is incredibly fulfilling work that you can do with your clients when they are engaged, and that's when they get the results. All right. So to conclude, thing number 1, oh goodness, I wish I had thought of a better term for it before I pressed record on this podcast. But we're going to go with thing number 1. And needless to say, my kids used to love watching The Cat in the Hat. And I used to watch that with them over and over again. And you will remember thing 1 and thing 2. Well, today's podcast has a thing 3 as well. Anyway, I digress. That was thing 1. You really want to encourage your team to dig into what is their theoretical approach and their understanding of human behavior in the work that they do. If they can have that, it's going to make such a big difference already. Okay, second thing 2. Thing number 2 is having a really good understanding of caseload management. And again, I'm talking a lot of clinical stuff here, but you know what? Getting this clinical stuff right is what allows your team to meet their KPIs. And that's good for your business. So as a business owner, we need to invest in these things for our team. So caseload management, if a clinician knows how to efficiently manage their caseload, that will allow them to very easily meet the billables that you are setting in private practice. And let me just clarify here, do not ask them to do 30 client hours a week. That is not what I refer to as reasonable. That was the number I did, that was my choice, but I've never asked in all my years of any clinician to meet 30 billable client hours a week. Never have, never will. If they want to, they can, that's up to them, but that would never be a billable that I would sit for any of my team members, irrespective of how experienced they might be. So let me just clarify that. But knowing how to manage a caseload, again, empowers the clinician. Because if you don't know how to do that, you're just going to be like fumbling the whole time. And that is when people get into that place where they just don't stay on top of their work. And their case notes don't get done. Their letters don't get done. They don't know where the client is in the process. And before they know it, everything is just snowballed, and all they want to do is run and hide, avoid, procrastinate, because everything has become too much. And that happens very insidiously. So you need to ask yourself, how do you do caseload management? How does your clinician do caseload management? Now, if you have an employee model, then you can train your employees in your caseload model. If you've got contractors, then they're going to have their own caseload management system, right? So there's a big difference in how we're going to manage employees and contractors. So for the purpose of today's discussion, I'm really focusing on your practice if you have an employee model, because if you've got employees, that is when you're going to have KPIs, right? Totally different operational management style between contracting and employees. So your employees need to know, how do we run session 1? How do we run session 2? What is those anchor sessions? How should all of these things happen? And I think what made it easy for me is that I am skilled in that. When I came over to Australia, my very, very first job in Australia was as a personal support coordinator. And maybe an interesting side note, when I started looking for jobs, having just arrived off the plane in Australia, nobody wanted to hire me as a psychologist because I did not have permanent residency. My husband and I came over on a work visa, which meant we had the right to work in Australia. It was a 4-year visa, but nobody wanted to hire me. And although I wanted to work in private practice always, I also knew that I needed to check out the lay of the land. I came to Australia having never even visited, having had no clue how the psychology, allied health, or private practice industry worked here. So I knew I had to get myself a job, do my very best in that job, and then do the research whilst I'm here, boots on the ground, and learn everything, which I did. So I got a job with the then PSP program, which was called the Personal Support Program. It was basically people that were on Centrelink, but they were diagnosed with a mental health condition that was preventing them from maintaining a job. They had an opportunity to engage in the PSP program for up to 2 years, to work through any mental health challenges and to really get them job ready at the end of the day. So that's what I did. I got my first job. The company was called Work Directions, and I started working in their Ipswich office. I was just basically thrown into the deep end, which is perfectly fine. I know how to learn to swim very quickly in any situation. Within 3 months, I was meeting all my KPIs. My site was the #1 site in Queensland. As a result, I was promoted to senior PSP coordinator, which meant that I now also was responsible for supervision, training, performance management of all the other PSP coordinators in the area, all the way from Southport to Maroochydore. So Work Directions had PSP offices in various locations within that area, which also meant that I got to travel a lot, drive up and down and visit all those locations. And then after another couple of months with them, I was co-opted into a working group that wrote and then rolled out the Work Directions caseload management model. So we wrote this whole manual, and then we went to all the Work Directions locations and we ran training for all the managers of all the offices, and then we did the training for the team at all the offices. So I had a really good foundation there for in caseload management, risk management, all of that type of stuff. And if you are really serious about empowering your team, you want to make sure that they are trained in caseload management. All of that stuff is what empowers a clinician to do their best work, to not burn out, to not get caught up in all this administrative burden. Because the thing is, there is admin in the work we do. If you are listening to this and you're thinking of becoming a psychologist, which I am, it is not what you see on TV, right? I used to watch Fraser Crane when I was much younger, and I thought, it looks so nice and easy. You just walk in, you see your client, you talk and you help them, they walk out, they feel better. It's like, no, there's a shit ton of admin that you need to do. And you know what? It's actually considered part of your work. So if you look at the most amounts of complaints that get sent into AHPRA, which is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, which is where you are registered as a psychologist, majority of complaints are due to communication. You know what communication is? Paperwork, lack of record keeping, inadequate record keeping. So you cannot be an allied health provider without the record keeping. That is how, let's be honest, you also cover your ass, because what if something were to happen to your client and then you've neglected it? Why would you do that? It is so important to have adequate records of how you've supported someone. You also need to have adequate records if you want to keep seeing certain people as part of Medicare, as part of NDIS, as part of whatever funding the client might have access to, whether that is DVA, Victims Assist, work cover. You cannot go into this work thinking you're just going to do client stuff. And therefore, there's no use getting annoyed at it, because it is what it is. And the sooner you embrace it, the better. But if you have a system around it, it's going to be so much easier. And that's where the caseload management comes in. And if you're asking yourself, Gerda, that is a really broad concept, caseload management, then I would encourage you to start with those anchor sessions. What is the anchor work that needs to happen at session 1, 2, and 6? To me, that is the anchor sessions in psychology. And if you go, oh, geez, I'm going to have to start this from scratch, and you already have a team, make this part of what you're going to do together as a team, right? You do not have to think of all these things yourself. You can if you want to, but if you've got a team of clinicians, go, hey, let's get this stuff out of everybody's heads. Let's make this our team meetings for the next 3-6 months and put something together. Maybe start a small little working group within the practice and give people that as a project to come up with what is your caseload management model within your practice. This is going to stand your entire team and business in good stead over many, many years to come. Okay, that is all about creating an asset within your business, and it's going to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of everything you do within your practice. And guess what? It's going to stop any burnout, and it's going to empower your team to achieve their KPIs. Last but not least is thing number 3, and that is being really confident and competent in how you run your session. And I refer to this as your session structure. So I've done a lot of training in time mastery in clinical practice. Between me and you, I've got a book in the works on that topic as well, but it's on the back burner at the moment. But I'm so super passionate about this. So I would highly encourage you to teach your team how to run a session. I can tell you this is one of the best things I could have done for myself, because I actually unpacked, like, how was I able to see 6 clients every hour on the hour? How was I able to stop at the 50-minute mark? How was I able to do that when I did see trauma, where I saw a lot of complex clients, where I had a lot of high-risk clients? How did I do that? And you actually have to stop and unpack stuff like this in order to bring it into conscious awareness. And then when I did that, I put that together in a diagram, and I've been teaching this to my clinicians at my practice for many years now, and it just works. And people find it incredibly empowering having this structure. Now, obviously, there's going to be times where the structure needs to be thrown out the window. We all know that. But 90% of the time, it works. So I am going to gift you a copy of my session structure. If you check out the show notes for today, you will find a link to a PDF download. It's like a clock that says, okay, you're starting at 9 o'clock. What do you do the first 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes, the next 20, blah, 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 blah. How you go through that. And I'm going to also give you access to a video training where I talk you through how that diagram or that session structure then works, answering some of those frequent questions that I get. So highly recommend that you download that. And if you don't have a session structure for yourself, test drive it yourself first. And then by all means, feel free to go and teach this to your clinicians. Needless to say, Having a set session structure that allows you to finish at that 50-minute mark is incredibly important because you need the next 10 minutes. And this is, I believe, one of the biggest reasons why clinicians burn out in private practice is due to a lack of clinical time mastery. They either don't start their sessions on time, so they're running late straight off the bat. They then don't finish their sessions on time, or even if they did start on time, they don't finish at the allocated time period, and then they don't get to do their notes. And then, before you know it, they've got days and days of notes that hasn't been done. And I can tell you, you start to forget. And yes, I know we've got AI these days and all that type of stuff. But you know what? Maybe I'm old school, but I don't want to rely on an AI tool to take my session notes. And even if it takes my session notes, I want to go through it and make sure it's accurate, because AI is not foolproof. And if my file gets subpoenaed and if I get called into court to defend the notes, I cannot blame it on AI. That's not going to fly in a court of law. It's still your responsibility to make sure that adequate notes have been kept. In all those years when I did clients one after the other, because that just works for me, I get an immense feeling of productivity. I hate having breaks between appointments. To me, it feels like such a waste of my time. It's like, okay, I'm sitting, twiddling my thumbs, checking emails. Why would I do that? Why would I break up my day like that? Now, obviously, that works for a lot of people, right? It doesn't work for me. And each of us need to do what works for us. But for me, I knew I had those 10 minutes and I always took handwritten notes because I'm just very tactile. I love handwritten notes. And I would take that. Even today, I take handwritten notes on my iPad. I would take it. I would write a lot of it in session. I would do the final note after the client has left. And by the time I started the next client, that file was done. It was done. I didn't have to look at it again. Do you know how amazing that is to know you leave the practice at the end of the day and all your notes have been written? I'm not leaving with that little anchor that says, oh shit, I haven't done my note. And now I need to remember to do it tomorrow. And I've got a full day of clients. And then that's when that pressure starts to build. And I'm going to forget some of the discussions we had. What if I forget the most important thing? Why would you do that to yourself? Don't do that to yourself. You really need to therefore know how to manage the session so that you can have the time to do the notes, whether it's handwritten, whether you type it up, whether it's AI where you look through it and you go, yes, I'm happy. I'm putting my digital signature on it. And now I can do the next session. Do you know how freeing it is getting your notes done on time? It is just the most amazing thing. And I think if clinicians can learn how to do that, it's going to make a significant amount of difference in their level of burnout, but also the level of joy they're going to have. So to recap, thing number one is really getting clarity on your theoretical framework and foundations via which you are going to be approaching your clinical work. Thing number two is getting really clear on the caseload model that you will be operating within and delivering services within. And then thing number three is really getting clear as to what your session structure is going to look like. And as I said, download mine and amend it accordingly. Your brain might not work exactly like mine, probably very different. The goal here is to have a structure. That's the goal. A structure that's going to support you, a framework that's going to support you to finish on time so you can get all the paperwork done so that you can enjoy the work that you are here to do. Now, for my group practice owners, you might be going, Gerda, I still have this niggling question in the back of my head about billables. So you said you did 30 client hours in a week and school hours. You said never ask your clinicians to do that. So what should I ask them to do? What is a good KPI? This is what I would say. For a full-time equivalent, and obviously if people are working part-time, you need to work that backwards. But I think what is really reasonable for a full-time equivalent, a fully registered psychologist, I'm not talking provisional psychologists, if they're working full-time, I would set billable client hours of 24 clients per week. So that means that it's more or less, and I'm rounding up here, 64% of their working week, which is 38 hours under our award, will need to be billable hours. It doesn't have to be client-facing. That could include report writing that gets paid for. But 24 hours of the 38 hours in the week needs to be billable. That means that for a full-time week, this clinician will have 14 hours. That is a full 2 days. Obviously, that is scattered throughout the week, but they would have a full 2 days for any non-billable admin, for any prep, for any research, for any in-house supervision, all of those other things that needs to happen. And I don't know about you, but I think that is pretty reasonable, knowing that they will have 2 full days for all of that stuff. Now, I also know that a lot of people struggle to get their clinical team to that number, hence today's podcast episode. So I honestly, if you go, yes, Gerda, maybe I've set 24 as the KPI for my team, but they're just not getting there. Maybe they're only getting to 22 or 20 or even 18. I've spoken to practice owners that says my team is like doing 12 average a week and I can't pay the bills. I struggle to pay their salaries. I'm so stressed out because I just don't have the money because the team aren't meeting the billables. I want you to consider the topics, the 3 things that I mentioned today, and just choose one of those things to go, let's just implement one. Do not try to do all of this at the same time. It will not work. You will overwhelm your team. Things will just go further down the drain. Okay, that is one of the biggest mistakes I see practice owners make, is when they want to try and do all the things all at once. And then they tell me it didn't work. You know why it didn't work? Because you tried to do all the things all at once. You need to be patient in business. Doesn't mean you just continue to tolerate what is not working. That's also not going to make a difference. You need to change things. Unless you change the way you do stuff, nothing's going to change. And I see this all the time. People reaching out to me, and they had reached out to me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and nothing has changed for them. And I find that incredibly sad when that happens, but it does. And I think we're all human. We are so stuck on the hamster wheel. So my input to you today is to get off the hamster wheel, to stop and go, if my people aren't getting to their KPIs, which of these 3 things do I need to implement? And I would implement the one that's going to be the easiest to implement. Is going to be the fastest to implement. And I would do that one first, and then make sure that you do it, that it's done really well, review it, tweak it, refine it, and then you can do the next one. And then you can do the next one. That is how you build a business. If you're a business owner, I would assume that you're in this for the long term. So stop trying to do everything at once, but start. If you don't start, you will not build that business that you desire and deserve. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility as a practice owner to have a profitable business. You actually have a legal requirement under Australian law to run a profitable business. Otherwise, you are trading whilst insolvent. So stop being ashamed, wanting to have a profitable business. There's no shame in it. But let's do it in a way that we don't burn out our clinicians, because when we do that, nobody wins. We can empower them, and we can share with them skills and strategies so that they can learn to love private practice just as much as we do. Alrighty, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for listening to all of my ramblings of today. I feel like I've gone off on a lot of different tangents, but yeah, go and check out the show notes, download the session structure. And as always, thank you so very much for tuning in. And remember that I am here to help you build a practice you can't stop smiling about.